Hello, I'm Toycat, and this is Switzerland, and this is Geneva within it. This is where the world powers came together just over 100 years ago to agree how war should be fought, or rather, specifically, how it shouldn't. And so the Geneva Conventions are one of the true embodiments of international cooperation, because every country agrees that there are some things that you should never do, even when you're actively trying to kill your enemies. And this is something interesting, because although different countries have different levels of ratifications to the Geneva suggestions, the truth is that many countries agree that yes, we need to have lines on where we do this. However, interestingly, there are other conventions on war, and the most famous of which right now is the Ottawa Convention, and this was signed by most of the world's countries, but notably not all of them. And you can see right here that a lot of the world's powers, Russia, China, and the United States, all have agreed, nah, actually, even though, having landmines is awful, you'll know this if you are familiar with all the campaigns in the Balkans, but the truth is, landmines are awful and end up killing civilians decades later, but the truth is, they're still really effective, so we'd like to use them. Why is this relevant? Well, it's important to note because the Anti-Personnel Landmines Convention was seen as a huge step forward, as another move towards humans becoming more civilized and hopefully not trying to hurt each other in 1997, but the truth was that even though we went through that, and the truth is that the 90s were a more optimistic time, and that's sad. I want to look back at the 90s and say, man, things sucked then, but the truth is, actually, nope, we're going in the opposite direction, because Poland and the three Baltic siblings, I was going to call them triplets, but you know, the Baltic twins, and their ugly sister, but the Baltic, you work out which one of them I mean, but basically Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia all said that they are unanimously recommending withdrawing from the Ottawa Convention. This is something which is bad on the surface, right? Like, wait, so they're gonna start planting mines again, and so ultimately gonna end in one of the biggest humanitarian disasters, because if you look at the list of countries that aren't in the, the Ottawa Convention, you'll get very quickly to places like, oh yeah, in Syria, they've been having a fun time recently. How's that been going for them? And according to this Guardian article, again, keep your biases in check, but according to this Guardian article, landmines in Syria kill hundreds of civilians returning home after the fall of Assad. They have stopped their war finally, but because of landmines and the fact that it is very hard to find them, specifically, that's the goal, yeah, a bunch of people are just gonna end up not only dying, but also being maimed horrifically, and what are you gonna do about that? Well, the answer is, oh, not actually very much. The war is over, but they planted the weapons when they were at war still, and so lots of people are just going to end up dying because of past decisions. This is what makes them so brutally cruel in many people's views, and so, yeah, is this bad news that Poland and the Baltic states are doing it? Well, I think so far we've definitely missed the key part of this, which is the fact that the reason they're going through this is that Russia has specifically not gone through with the same treaty. Again, if we note right here, they're not a signatory, and ultimately now we are getting to the point where defensive wars are becoming a real possibility again. It's again, the optimism of the 90s was like, oh yeah, the only reason you'll ever need to go to war is if you see something happening in another part of the world and you just feel inclined to jump in yourself, and defend those people and liberate their resources, liberate the people, and it's going to be that was the only way that we could have foreseen there was going to be a war. But nope, now major parts of the Western world order, even major EU members, NATO members, are looking to themselves and going, there's a real chance that our neighboring country might just jump in and decide they want a part of ours, and so what do you do about that? The answer is landmines. Make it so horrifically impossible to jump over that border, make it so lots of people will be killed and maimed if they try, and ultimately the reason that this is probably bad news is due to the fact that, if you were to place mines between the borders, and then eventually, you're effectively solidifying that it will be a hostile border forever, and again, the goal of the Western world used to be, in the optimistic 90s, that Russia would jump aboard and be like, oh yeah, we are European country too. We love trade, and we love actually growing wealthy and, having elected leaders that we choose. The goal was for them to think all of these things, but they seem not to anymore. The only good news that I can say about this, this little depressing headline that you might read is the fact that if we read a little bit deeper, you can see that even though they are withdrawing from the treaty, and even though there's 160 other nations in there, it's worth mentioning that with the decision, they're sending a message: we're prepared and can use every necessary measure to defend our territory and freedom. But notably, what's interesting about this is despite their intention to leave the treaty, the defense ministers stated that they would remain committed to humanitarian law, including the protection of civilians during armed conflict, and Estonia's defense minister goes even further, saying we currently have no plans to develop, stockpile, or use previously banned anti-personnel landmines. And so ultimately, I think that, this is just another step towards the idea of there will be a permanent border, a brand new Iron Curtain, if you want to call it that, but creating a brand new, wall between, West and the East in this way. Yeah, it's a very scary thing to be seeing in a certain angle, but I also think it's just another step of ratcheting up that pressure. Speaking of, by the way, I almost, the fact that, the major politician against the main president of Turkey having some issues. That's a fun little story. But I just want to point out that, there's a lot of bad things happening on that front, and the war. I think there's a weird game going on where the US and Russia are fighting over what gets to happen with Ukraine, which is a useful reminder that as a middle power country, a lot of people are like, if you are, you should be able to determine everything you want to do yourself and blah, 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 blah. You shouldn't be dependent on any other countries. I think the actual smartest position is to be specifically dependent or have multiple countries dependent on you. When lots of countries are invested in your success, I would say that is the benefit Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania have is, all of the EU, the euro is all valid there. You don't want to have your euro stolen, but also there is a huge investment within NATO and the EU of keeping these countries around. And so even though in a world where might just made right and there was no consequences, they might lose a war with Russia eventually if Ukraine can, right? The truth is, they are so deeply ingrained that, good luck trying that. And this is the interesting thing that I would say if you're a small country watching this, you're probably very aware of this, but yeah, keeping on good sides of multiple world powers and making sure they feel like you need to exist is probably how you can continue to exist in a strong form. It's something Singapore worked out, it's something Switzerland worked out, and the very reason that the biggest convention on war, the Geneva Convention, is signed there is because everyone in Europe agrees there should be a neutral country in the middle here, and once everyone agrees that, you all of a sudden you can become quite wealthy off the back of that fact, and it's something useful to note that you can become a big country or you can become a small country that every big country loves. And I think that I'm glad for my good pals Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania that they've become the second one, and I hope you continue to do so. Speaking of continuing to do so, I just got back from a trip to Romania, so I have this map that I keep updated if you're curious as to where I've been. And it tells me how many countries I've been to. It's a very silly, very low-tech map compared to what you can find. But now I can go to Romania and tick it off. I specifically was aiming to go to all EU countries before the Brexit referendum in the UK, and sadly I didn't get round to them all. So just had to vote leave just to make sure I didn't later find out that all Croatians were rough or something like that. But now there's only 4 EU countries left to visit, if I'm not mistaken: Portugal, Croatia, Greece, and Cyprus. And so you better believe I'm going to have a crazy beach crawl or something like that to finally have been to all EU member states. Anyway, speaking of going to all EU member states, I hope that you've enjoyed this video. I must be the only person who has gone to all of the Baltics and I know Czechia and Slovakia, to have gone to all of these places but not to have gone to a single major beach destination. I must be the only British tourist who's not there specifically, for that other thing. Anyway, with that said, thank you very much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I am back, so we might have some more news tomorrow. Who's to say? I feel like I really, I feel like Russia and Turkey are in a continual state of oh, they're doing something wild over there. So hopefully there's something, more delightful to cover. Hopefully there's much more exciting stuff happening tomorrow. There's astronauts coming back. That's exciting. Let's get some positivity rolling for tomorrow's video. That's my goal. Whatever we get into tomorrow, it'll be the most positive story I can possibly find. Because we could do with a little bit of that, couldn't we? Anyway, thank you for watching. Second channel, don't care. Bye.